is being live streamed. Got it. All right, let's go. I'm going to, again, share the text so that I can be looking at the screen. Maybe here, even though that's not the right tab. Switch over to the correct tab. Okay, so we're going to finish chapter 5, and we will leave the rest of the Megillah for another year. We've gotten to the point where the first Mishteh with Esther, the king, and Haman has been held, and Haman is about to leave, and I need my text to come up on the screen because otherwise it's not going to work. There we go. It's working. It's either doing what it's doing or it's not. While I'm waiting for the text to come up on the screen from Svaria, actually that's Patshegan. This is actually the tab that I want. It's the one from Svaria. That one's also not coming up. But while I'm waiting for it, I will. I said, now it's at least loading. I was going to say I would actually read from my Sefer, but just as I was getting ready to do that, text did show up. Here we are. So we're at Pasuk 9. I'm going to read Hebrew, Targum Rishon, and then we'll go back and do Targum Sheni again like we did last week. I think that works well for units of text to see how the two different deal with it. So the Megillah itself says, "V'yetzei Haman b'yom hahu sameach v'tov lev v'chirot Haman et Mordechai b'sha'ah hamelech lo kam v'lo zam mimenu v'yimaleh Haman al Mordechai chema." And Haman went out from where to where it doesn't say. Assumption from the flow of the story, I guess, is that he left the palace. He left the Mishteh, left the queen's quarters, whatever it was, on that day. He was happy. He's joyous and tov lev. He had, good-hearted. Now, normally tov lev has, this sense of expansiveness, okay? And as Haman's seeing Mordechai at the gate of the king, and he didn't arise and he didn't move from him, didn't move from in front of him, whatever. Again, we're filling in the blanks. Who is it who didn't arise? It's Mordechai who didn't arise. Lo zam mimenu, didn't move from him or because of him or whatever. The him there is presumably Haman. V'yimaleh Haman, so now we have a subject, and Haman was filled anger against Mordechai, right? Or Haman was filled, fine, the Hebrew does that, where English does have a preposition here that Lashon HaKodesh does not. And the Targum is, as you can see, considerably longer. And it says, "V'nafak Haman milavat malka," from in front, essentially from in front of, from being by the king. All right, that makes sense. B'yomahu, on that day, very Hebrew to say hahu. It's not actually Aramaic. Chade uv'dach liba. Chade is filled with simcha, sameach. B'dach liba. So we have the word in Hebrew, Mishnaic Hebrew, modern Hebrew, etc. The badchan is the jester. It's the person who makes everybody laugh at a wedding. B'dichut is to talk joshingly, jokingly, whatever. So he was in really an expansive spirit. And, we don't tend to think of Haman as being somebody who can joke around, but that's really where he was, according to this Targum. V'chad kaza, okay, and when Haman saw Yat Mordechai, Yat taflaya da'asikin b'pitkame oraita. He didn't just see Mordechai, he also saw the children who were busy with words of Torah. B'Sanhedrin, da'avadat lahon Esther bitra Malka. In the Sanhedrin, the Sanhedrin is a larger court, either of 23 or the great Sanhedrin was 70 people or 71 people, but the smaller Sanhedrin were courts of 23, and the children were there to learn. Okay, and Esther had set it up for them. Bitra Malka, at the gate of the king. Mordechai la kam min kadam andrate. La ratat mine. Elhin peshat yat ragle yemine. Vachavele shtar zvinta de is the bain le. Tuma dilcham. Okay, so the story keeps going. Before, let's stop and see what's getting at it in here. It's not just Haman and Mordechai. Mordechai is there with the children around him, and the children are learning Torah. And it's in a Jewish court, which is in the gates. And Mordechai doesn't get up from in front of his. So what's an andrat? We use the word andart in modern Hebrew. It's obviously from the Aramaic. And to be honest, a word like that may originally have been from the Persian. It's like a bust or a statue. Okay, we use the word andart. Basically, nowadays it sort of means a memorial, some kind of memorial statue that's placed somewhere so that we remember it. And so he didn't get up because of from in front of his bust. In other words, we have a chazal that tells us that Haman was wearing around his neck a gachka, some kind of, pestle, some kind of little statuette that exemplified some sort or other of Avodah Zarah. And so because of that, Mordechai didn't get up. And he didn't, ratat is like he wasn't at all anxious. He wasn't quaking in his boots because of him, right? He didn't show any kind of fear or awe. There was no covet being given neither to Haman nor to his religion nor to anything else. Rather, what does Mordechai do? He sticks out his right leg. Okay. And he tells him, Shtar Zabinta, this is the bill of sale. Is the banle that Haman was sold to Mordechai as a slave. Betuma dilchem b'michtava b'is tarklile kol kavel arkuvte min yad kif rugze. Okay, excuse me, up to the min yad. All right. What is this telling us? So there's this. It's a chazal, right? It's brought in Esther Rabbah. I don't think it's actually brought in the Gemara, or at least not here on this pasuk. It's not brought in the Gemara. That Mordechai and Haman had both been officers in charge of portions of Achashverosh's army. And Mordechai was a wise person, and he made sure that he had a decent logistic train, that he was going to be able to feed his troops. People are more able to fight well if they are eating well, etc. And so he had, not only did he have the troops that he was in charge of, but he had everything that was necessary to take care of them. Haman, on the other hand, was not such a foresightful leader. And at one point during the battles, he and his troops all ended up like mamish starving. And they lost a battle, whatever. And Mordechai was there sort of and saved the day. But beyond just saving the day, he also had food and water and, armaments and this, that, and the other. And Haman, asked him to share it. And Mordechai said, I need this for my troops. That was my job as their leader. Your job as leader of your troops was to do the same. So if you want, you can buy it from me, and I'll, some of it from me, not all of it, because I still need for my troops. And I'll send, and I'll take the money that you give me and I'll send back, and hopefully, I'll get the logistic train going and I'll get the things here in time. And Haman didn't have any money with which to give to Mordechai to pay for this stuff. And so Mordechai says to him, all right, fine, sell yourself to me as a slave. And then, we'll set your worth at XYZ. But as your master, then everything that belongs to you belongs to me anyway, right? And then, but also if you're my slave, then I'm responsible for you, and I'm responsible for the people that are dependent on you, and then I will take care of them. So that's how essentially they got around it. And Mordechai, Baruch Hashem, also managed to bring up more supplies, etc., to be able to keep everybody going. So this took place off where, whoever knows, that, in the mountains somewhere or other it took place. And so they wrote a bill of sale. Okay. And so, right, this was for paying for the bread, and it was in writing. And it was from this time of the war. And upon seeing, so it wasn't just upon seeing Mordechai that Haman became extremely angry. It was because Mordechai, essentially, according to the Medrash, right, where is Mordechai keeping this bill of sale? So he keeps it like wrapped around his cap. And so he, by sticking the leg out towards Haman, he said, see here, I don't have to get up and bow down to you. You're my slave. You need to be bowing down to me. If anybody's bowing down to anybody, and I don't really care about it, so you don't need to bow down to me, sort of thing. But he doesn't even say anything, right? He just keeps on teaching the kids, and he just sticks out the leg and shows Haman this bill of sale. And Haman immediately, miyad, immediately, t'kif rugze, his anger boils up and becomes very strong. V'itmele Haman alave Mordechai rutcha, and he becomes boilingly angry, right? Lirtoach. He becomes boilingly angry at Mordechai because he doesn't want to be reminded. If nothing else, he doesn't want to be reminded of how poor an officer he was, at the very least. The Megillah goes on and says, he held himself back. And he came to his house. And he sent, and he had brought his bosom buddies and his wife Zeresh. Vizdaris, Haman, and Haman. So it's so interesting. Yitapeg, I translated it as he held himself back, because that's the modern meaning of Yitapeg. Okay, it can be read as essentially like he wrestled with himself, maybe. The Aramaic has Vizdaris, and he rushed. Okay, he moved quickly to get out of this public scene, which is the other side of Vihitapek, right? If you're trying to hold yourself back, you may feel that you're not going to be able to really hold yourself back completely, and so you're going to want to get out of the public eye so that you can just let it all go. You can let loose. So he hurried. He was holding himself back, or he was hurrying home, and he entered into his house. He came to his house, Ushadar, and he sent, Ukra, and he called Yat Richomoi, his Ovav, the people that he, his bosom buddies, Yat Zeresh Rishiata Intate, and Zeresh the Russia, his wife, and were given her yichus also. Barat Tatne Pachat Ever Nahara. She was the daughter of somebody named Tatnai, who was the Pasha, the governor general, whatever, of the other side of the river. Vayisaper lehem Haman, and Haman tells them at Kavod, Ashro, V'rov Banav, he tells them about the great honor that he has as a result of his wealth and the fact that he has so many sons. At Kol Asher Gidlo Hamelach, and to what a great extent the king had raised him up, had given him greatness. Ve'et Asher Nis'o al Hasarim, and that he had placed him higher above the other officers and ministers, Va'avdei Hamelach, and the other servants of the king. The Aramaic says, V'ishtei lehon Haman, Yat Yakar Atre, and Haman tells over to them, right? He's Mesaper Ishtei. The Yakar is the Kavod, Atre is Osher, the top shin switch. Okay, so this is now very much the same as Lashon HaKodesh. Behech itmane im dukse malka, and how he was appointed with the other dukes, the other high officers of the king. Behech rahatin kadamoy sgiut benoi deskomhon matan utmanya. And how the Rov Banav, right? He has so many children, and they were all like running ahead of him. And the schum, the number of his children, of his sons, is 180, 108. Barmin, not including Isarte Ocharinan Inun Pumarquin al Palchaya, not including some other tens. We don't use the word dozens in Hebrew, some other tens, that they were already old enough to be given positions they were already old enough to have been appointed to positions themselves. And so they were in charge of the various provinces. Ubar min Shamshai Tuhu Safar Safrana de Malka, and not including another son of his called Shamshai, who was the scribe of the king. And we're going to hear about him, I think, at the beginning of the next parak. So I don't think we're going to hear about him this year. V'yat ma dirabe yate, and so Rov Banav, I mean, we're talking about like there were 108, and then another few, in English we would say another few dozen, another set of some tens of them, and also particularly this one called Shamshai. Right. So, and now we're back to, so that opened up that phrase, Rov Banav, and then the remainder of the sentence in the Aramaic is exactly the same as in Lashon HaKodesh, V'yat madi rabe yate malka, and to the extent that the king had made him great, V'yat zakfe olave kol rav v'noi, and that he put him to be sort of an overseer over all of the other sarim, va'avdoi, and avadim of the king. Okay. He's there at home, and he's bragged about his wealth and his children and his position, right? And then he says, "Af lo hevia Esther hamalka im hamelach el hamishte asher asata ki im oti." And not only that, but also Esther, the queen, didn't bring to the party that she made, didn't bring somebody else along with the king to this party that she made other than me. And also tomorrow I am called to her, im hamelach, along with the king. And none of this is worth anything to me. As long as I see Mordechai the Jew sitting in the gate of the king. So that's the next two psukim here. You'd bet and you'd get them all. And you see, Targum's not going to add a whole lot. But Haman said, Baram la han alat Esther makta imakal mishte di avadat. And beyond that, the queen, Esther the queen, didn't cause to come along with the king to the party that she made other than Elohim Yati, other than me. V'uf idan machar, and also the same time tomorrow, or at the idan, not the same time, idan, the period of tomorrow. Okay, this time tomorrow, Ana Muzuman, I'm also invited Levata to her, Lemisod im Malka, to have a meal together with the king. V'kol da lete timi Levati, and none of this has any time, doesn't do me any good. V'kol idan diana chaze yat Mordechai Yehuda, as long as I see Mordechai the Jew, Diyatev B'Sanhedrin, in Ulemaya, Pitra Paltrin Demalka, who is sitting with this Sanhedrin, along with the youths. Ulem is a word for like Na'ar or Bachor, in the gate of the palace of the king. So there's just one more verse. So I'm gonna finish it off, and that don't want that. Sorry about that. And I'm gonna finish it off, and then we'll go take a look at what Targum Sheni does with this same part of the story. But Tomer lo zeresh ishto kol havav yasu eitz gvoha 50 amah. And Zeresh, his wife, said to him, and not only she, but also all of his his bosom buddies, his beloved ones, or the ones who love him. Yasu eitz kvoha, you should make a gallows 50 amah tall. Ubaboker emor lamelech v'yidlu et Mordechai alav. And in the morning, say something to the king about it, and they'll hang Mordechai on this gallows. Uvo im hamelech el mishteh sameach, and you can come along with the king to the drinking party in a happy mood, because you'll know that Mordechai is done with. V'yitav hadavar lifnei Haman v'ya'as ha'etz. And the matter sounded good to Haman, and he, in fact, he made the gallows. Now, I doubt very much that he personally went out and made the gallows, although we'll see if one of the Targumei reads it directly like that, or that he had the gallows made. All right. So the Targum here, you see, is a little longer. Okay, it's quite a bit longer. So we're going to get some extra backstory here. And then we're going to go back on this whole business of what happens between the time Haman goes out, sees that Mordecai doesn't give him honor. He loses all of his joy. He gathers together the people that he feels he can trust to give him advice and that he can vent to, and he vents. And in order to let them know how, it's one of these nafochu things, right? Like how turned upside down he is. He came out and everything was great. And then he sees this and he's so down in the dumps, and he wants to, and tomorrow it should be that he's going to be on top of the world again. And yet how can he do that if he has to pass by this Mordechai figure? And so they give him the advice that they just gave him. And that's going to be the end of this parak and the end of what we're going to talk about this year. So this time she isn't called Zeresh or Shiata Intite. She's just called, right? She's not called Zeresh, the wicked one, his wife. She's just called Zeresh, his wife. V'kol Rechimoy, and all of his bosom buddies, all of the ones who love him. In Shapir Be'enach, if you think this is a good idea. So you'll notice, that's a polite way to speak to somebody who has a position of authority greater than yours. You will notice that actually in Lashon HaKodesh, it doesn't say im tov al libcha or be'enecha. It doesn't say that. Okay, it doesn't say if it's tov be'enecha, in shapir be'enach. It's not there. All right. Neymar kadamach milta chada. We can say one thing in front of you. So there, part of what he's so upset about is that Mordechai didn't give him kavod. If you actually look at the language in the Megillah itself, it looks like neither did his wife or his best buds give him kavod. But in the Targum, they're giving him that kavod. So if it's a good idea, if you want, right, if you accept, then we have something to suggest. Ma denavid le Mordechai Yehuda imhu chad min tzadikaya it beriu ba'alma in b'charba nichtolyate. So here's the deal. What can be done to Mordechai the Jew if he's one of these tzaddikim for whom the world was created? Then he can't be killed with a sword. Okay, kvar itapach harba v'titremei elana, because what'll happen is the sword will essentially rebound. Okay, it'll turn. Right, here's our nafocho. It'll turn. And it'll be raised up against us. So, nehav yate laraguma. So maybe we can give him over to be stoned. Kiva ganes. But that doesn't sound like that's going to work very well, because David Hamelach already Renes Galyat Plishta. He, right, with his slingshot, brought down Goliath, the Philistine, with the stone. So maybe Ruguma, right, the Lirgom is this language of stoning. That's not going to work either. V'im b'tardin chasha nirme yate kvar baze menashe unafak mine. And if we're gonna like pour down on him this stuff of copper, okay, but Menashe has already was already potsea. He was already he already was able to split that apart, and he was able to go out from it. So you can't tie him up in shackles of Nechoshet. As Nizrok Yate Liyama Rabba, maybe we could throw him into the Great Sea. Oh, about Kvar B'Zaone B'nei Yisrael V'Avaru B'Gva. But it's already been the case that the sea itself was split, and for B'nai Yisrael, and they passed through it. So Nirme Yate Lago Atunura Yikidata. We could throw them into a fiery furnace. Those of you who've been learning Daniel with me recognize, right? Go atu nuri kirita, because that's what happened to Hanani, Mishael, and Azariah, which is exactly what the Medrash is going to say. Kvar da'akwoi. This was already done to Hanani, Mishael, and Azariah. Unafaku min gave, and they came out from, the ties that they'd been tied up with just sort of melted away from them, and they walked around inside the fire, calm and cool like a pleasant spring day, and they came out from the fiery furnace just fine. That doesn't sound like you're going to be able to kill a tzaddik for whom the world was created that way. So what can we do? Unafaku. And they went out from that. Okay, so maybe you could throw him into a lion's den. And this is what we're just doing now. We're getting ready to do now. Probably won't get it. Might get it done before Pesach, but might not get it finished until after Pesach, that parak. Because, right, this is the story of Daniel and the lion's den. Kvar lo chabilu ayuvata b'Daniel. But the lions already didn't damage Daniel at all. Kadchai. Nidrame yate kadam kalbin. Right? So maybe you could throw him alive in front of the dogs. Kvar istatim pum kalbin ba'ar de Mitzrayim. But the mouth of the dogs was already sealed in the land of Mitzrayim. Al b'nei Yisrael, that they didn't, right? We have the pasuk that lo nechortzu. They didn't bark at the Jews when they were leaving Mitzrayim. And for that, we reward them and we give them the meat of the nevela and all sorts of other things. But that's what we do. But the point is that Haman's advisors were saying, they were thinking of all the ways that you could put somebody to death. And each and every one of them had been tried against Am Yisrael or some tzaddik or other. And each one of them had failed because, one or another Jew managed to survive this. So that didn't work. All right. Okay. In the land of Egypt, Al B'nai Yisrael Madbra Nigleyate. And when the Jews, the children of Israel, came to the wilderness, it was everything was revealed. to them. Kvar b'madbara nefisha usgi'u ma'od, right? And so already in the wilderness, and they became many. You would think that sending somebody out in the wilderness with no food and no water would also be a way to put somebody to death. And yet, I mean, even without going to the story of Yosef, who also survived being left in a pit in the wilderness that he couldn't get out of by himself with no food and no water. You think that's a way to kill somebody. They don't even go back to the Yosef story. I'm going back to the Yosef story. But he's like, but Israel went out into the wilderness and they all survived it. So, or many of them survived it, right? And so that's not going to work. As ma'od, what else is there? Tala, what other kind of death? Niktol yate are we going to be able to do to kill him? And so this kind of death that should be done to him, nirmeyate lebeit asire. Perhaps we can throw him into a jail. Kvar min beit asire. Now we get the Yosef story. Amlichu Yosef. Not only did Yosef get out of jail, they made him a king. Sakina nitrume al tzavre. Maybe you could put a knife to his throat, but kvar hava itapkat sakina ma'alave de Yitzchak. But the knife was turned away from the throat of Yitzchak. Eine naver v'nishbok yate yichta. So maybe we can blind his eyes, and in order to save himself, yiktol b'na, kama diktol shimshon, right? And so then maybe we'll be able to kill him the way that Shimshon got killed. But pornita de gavad la yadinan ma, but that didn't work either, because although Shimshon was blinded and everything else, but he davened, his strength came back to him, and he brought the building down on everybody else. He may have died along with them, but that doesn't really sound like what we would like to have happen to us. So really, they start off by saying, if you're okay, we have what to offer, and then they go through a whole list of things, but this doesn't work, and this doesn't work, and this doesn't work, and this doesn't work, and it's like the whole history of Am Yisrael up until the time of Purim, right? So, so we don't know of anything that can be done or that we can do. Ela tzliva rabba ita vedle. You make a big. Nowadays, that word means a cross. Okay, you make a big gallows, and you're going to hang him on this gallows until he dies. Okay, not necessarily, with the noose around the neck, but they used to tack people up on these big gallows or these trees. That's why they were called saliva. That's why they were called a cross, and they would leave them there exposed. Okay, so nobody's tried that yet. Basically, is the deal. So maybe that'll work, right? So let a big cross, a big gallows, a big wooden structure be made for him. Va'al bava devaite deme yishtefech komate titrame al tzaliva v'yechazun yate kol Yehudae v'kol chavboi richimoy shmaya va'ar kachada tzaitin al tzaliva. Okay, and so they're suggesting that you have this big cross, this big gallows made for him, and at the gate of his house, his blood should be spilled. let him be essentially thrown onto this cross, and all of the Jews and all of his friends and all of his bosom buddies and the heavens and the earth as one will see him. And Saitin al Tzliva the Atkin Haman Mordechai, and they'll be frightened of or obey because of this cross, that this gallows that Haman affixed, right? Takin, that he set up for Mordechai. To do it for the morning time. Va'al kadam malka, and go in before the king, come to the king. Usha'al minei, and request him al tzliva haden, about this gallows, this cross. B'sha'ata hi la shalach manoi v'la shachav Haman bar Hamdata ad azel va'aite yat nagaraya yat ketzae nagaraya da'adin sliba. Okay, and so from the moment that he heard that suggestion, Haman didn't do anything else, and he didn't sleep, this Haman bar Hamdata, until he went and he brought the carpenters and all the tools, etc., that they needed, that they should make this huge gallows. V'kaitzai dim taknin sakin de farzel, and they also fixed. They were matakin an iron knife. Uvnoi da Haman daitzin v'chadjin, and so Haman's sons were, right, ditza v'chedva. Okay, language that we know from weddings. They were happy and dancing and everything else. Zeresh itate menagna b'kinrin, and his wife Zeresh was playing on some sort of a harp or a kinor. Im Haman Rishia, with the wicked Haman v'amar Agra le Nagare, and he said, Agra here is not about height, it's about payment. He says, the payment for the carpenters, Ana Yehev Ulakaitzae, Ana Mataken, Shiruta al Tzliva de. And so I'm going to give the reward to these carpenters and also to these kaitzai. I'm going to fix up that they all have some service. And he came, and this tzliva hadin b'shata, and that they'll come into service, and then Sliva Hadin Bashata come, Haman Rishiam Sayat Sliva Wakomate. And so this gallows at that time, Haman, the wicked one, got up in order to erect the gallows to its full height, Nafkat Bat Kol. And a voice, a bat kol, came forth, Mishmei Maroma, from the highest heavens. The Amarad lay and said to him, Ye'eh Haman Rishia. Good for you, Haman the wicked. V'lach Shvar Bar Hamdata. And for you, it's Tov, Shapir. It's good. The son of Hamdata. Ushvar Pitgama Kadam Haman. And Haman was like, wow, he even has the imprimatur of the heavens, right? So that's what he thinks is going on. And the word before Haman was good, Va'avad Sliva Lagarme, but what is the bat kol really saying? Look at this. Haman has made a gallows for himself, Lagarme. Hava min yoma dezamnat Esther yat Haman l'sheruta. because from the time that, that's that Sheruta up here also is probably not in the sense of Sherut of service, but Sheruta of a meal. That he made a special meal for the not the, for like the secondary workers. For the main workers, he gave them their schar, their salary, and for these other ones he made them a meal, and down here also a meal. Okay, because from the day that Esther invited Haman to the meal, it'aku b'nei Yisrael, because then what happened? B'nei Yisrael cried out, v'amrin dain l'dain, and each one said to the other, hadain misanenan b'kol yoma v'yoma detiv Esther min malka deniktale. That they were counting on each and every day that they were expecting of Esther that she would go from the king and that she would demand of him that Haman should be put to death. And instead, she invited him, Sheruta, she invited him to a meal. Baha Shata, at that time, Shafachu Devet Yaakov Kuhun Libhon, they all poured out their hearts, all of Beit Yaakov. All of the people, all the Jews poured out their hearts. And they beseeched mercy, and they wanted to be found, Ritzui, before their Father who is in heaven. V'kein amrin kadamoi, and this is also what they said before him. Ane yatan, ane, answer, right? Like anenu Hashem, anenu, right? This is slichot. Answer us. Kol me'ika hech detalin ene avdoi lemarehon, from all type of lachatz, of distress, just as the eyes of the slave are dependent on their master. This is actually a translation of Tehillim, right? And the eyes of the maidservant on her geveret, right? It's one of the Shiramala Kedain. Similarly, Talyan Inena Alach. So too our eyes are dependent upon you, Hashem. Ad Idan, the Titkale, until such time as you reveal yourself, V'tifrok Yatana, and save us, Tahasana, from this hater, U'ba'al Dvava, and this enemy, Megadev, who is this blaspheming enemy. Amar man inun Yehudai, who are these Jews? That's what he said. B'chein shma b'kal tzloton, and then God listened to the voice of their prayers. V'avad ba'uton, and he did according to their request. Right? We heard about. So here we have prayer and request. Earlier we had she'elah, a question and a request. Here it's prayer and request, that which they had requested of him, of God. Belelia mitul di b'kol zimna di farakyaton min bale de bavahon belelia prikyaton. And so just as every time that he saves them, God saves them from their enemies, it happens at night. Okay? The song we have from the Haggadah, it happens at night. Prik Yaton mi Paro. He saved them from Paro. It was in the middle of the night. When we Sancherah, and from Sancherah, it was in the middle of the night. Sancherah was encamped around the city, and they were about actually to to open the city gates and to surrender. And in the morning, Sancherib's army was gone, just like gone. And so just as God caused Sancherib's army to run away and killed the Bekorot and Mitzrayim, etc., so Min call the Kamo Alehan, and so too he will save us in the middle of the night, in the middle of the darkest time. He will save us from, he saves them, meaning I'm Israel, but that's us, from their enemies. So the Targum, so this is the same Targum that told us that the reason that Esther had invited Haman was for three reasons. One of them was to get the Jews to pray. And so here it's tying it back together and saying she succeeded. She succeeded because they decided they couldn't put their trust in her. The only one they had left to put their trust in was the HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and they really opened up and were really able to daven to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And so he responded, and of course, what we will start with next year is on that night, the sleep of the king was shaken, as it were. But that's only Targum Rishon. And so, although it's going to take a little while, I'm going to finish it out because I want us to also get to see Targum Sheni. So let's go to Targum Sheni. Which the whole thing for chapter 5 is 6 pages long, but that's because some of them are little pages and some of them are full-size pages, and we're actually done with most of it. Because this is this? Here we are. This is the 4th one, and I think I'm way down at the bottom of the 4th one, or maybe I'm already onto the 5th one. Nope. Already onto the 5th page, so we're almost done. Here we are, Tet. Right, so remember, what happened was Haman went out. From where? We don't know. The Targum Sheni, so it's interesting. We saw where Targum Rishon expanded. So let's see, Targum Sheni is not going to expand in the same places. It's going to tell a different kind of story. He went out on that day happy. Chade is like Sameach. Shapir Liba is just Tov Lev. And without, not badach, not with this bidichut, this extra sense of joviality of letting go, but just Shapir. Okay, and when Haman saw Mordechai sitting in the gate of the house of the king, that word beit is added in compared to the original of the Megillah. And he didn't get up and he didn't move because of him. Itle Haman al. There we go. Al Mordechai chemata. That's it. It's just the Aramaic equivalent of exactly the verse in the Megillah. V'it chamem Haman al lego bete. So Haman it chamem, right? We saw Isdris. Right, he hurried. We saw the Hebrew was v'yitapek, and so itchamem. He was angered, but he held it inside. Okay, and he came into his own house. Ushdar, and he said, "Ukral l'richomai v'uzeresh intete," and he called to his bosom buddies and to Zeresh, his wife. Now, the pasuk says v'yaveh, shalach v'yaveh. He sent and he had brought, and both Aramaic is saying he sent and he called. But how do you have people brought? Because you call to them. Okay, so sounds not much different. I don't think that the Aramaic is really giving us anything that we basically didn't already know. And Vatane Lahon. So instead of Ishta'e, which was the language we heard in the previous Targum, here we have Tane, which is the language of like Vishinantam, the Tafshin switch that we have, Lishanen, to go over. He told them over at length, right? He repeated over to them, right? Yat Yekire de Utre, about the kavod of his great wealth, Revuta Divnoi, and how many sons he had, but we're not given here the numbers of them and these other, and what roles. Some of them are already adult sons, and they're actually already serving in the government, and that we don't hear in Targum Sheni. V'yakol ma deromem yate malka, and all the ways in which the king had elevated him. V'yakol ma denatil yate le'el min kol Ruvanaya, and that the king, to the extent that the king had lifted him up above all of the other sarim, officers, ministers, v'avdoi demalka, and servants of the king. Again, not really adding anything that we didn't already hear in the Megillah. V'amar Haman, and Haman said, Ufla zaminit Esther makta imaka l'sheruta di avidat elayate. Also, on top of all of this, Esther, the queen, didn't invite anyone to a meal along with the king that she made other than me. And also tomorrow I am invited to her along with the king. And all of this doesn't actually bring me joy. And it's not good for me because as long as I actually see this Mordechai the Jew, Yati Bitra, who's sitting in the gate of the king. All of this, none of this does me any good. And Zeresh, his wife, and all of his bosom buddies say to him, now, this is, right, our last verse again. And so here is a similar list to what we had in Targum Rishon, which is Benura la techol mirme. You can't burn him. It's no good to try to throw him into a fire. Because Avram, his father, was saved from a fiery furnace. We don't have to go to recent history, Chanai, Mishael, and Azariah. We can go to more ancient history, which also took place basically in this part of the world, right? Ur Kasdim. So it's known in this part of the world that you can't burn this family. You can't kill him with the sword. So rather than talking about other swords that were aimed at the Jewish people in more recent history, they're just taking it back to that knife that was at Yitzchak's throat. Yitzchak was saved from the sword. You can't drown him in water. Because Moshe was saved from the water, and not only that, so were all of Am Yisrael, right? So Moshe as a baby, and then again at Kriyat Yamsuf. Now we're coming to more recent history. You can't throw him into a lion's den. Because Daniel was saved from the lion's den. So therefore, what you should do is make this thing, which is 50 amma tall, but Safra, Emor Lamalka v'yitzlavun yad Mordechai Elohe. And so in the morning, speak with the king, and let Mordechai be hung on this eitz. Da'at kedain la itnasi chad min hon b'tzlivat kesav ish taziv. Because up until now, not one of these Jews has been tested against the gallows and been saved. Min b'tarken ul imaka levet mishtaya, and then after that you'll be able to come with the king to the party house, right? B'chadva ushvar pitkama, and b'chadva b'simcha, in happiness. Ushvar pitkama kadam haman, and these words found favor, sounded like a good idea. Okay, Shapir, before Haman. V'avad kesa legarme, and he made, and it's such a smaller version of it. He made for himself this kesa. He made for himself this gallows. So as opposed to having the bat kol come forth and say, oh, this is this great thing, and he's made this gallows for himself, the issue of being hoisted by one's own petard, preparing the vessels of one's own destruction. But so both basically in terms of the end here, and it's interesting, Targum Rishon is actually much more explicit in a lot of ways, and particularly in terms of saying, in letting us know that Esther's attempt to get Am Yisrael to realize that they can't depend on human beings. Yes, you have to put in your hishtadlut, there's no question, but you can't depend on human beings. Ultimately, you have to daven. And you daven that you're sent the right shlichim, that you daven that the hishtadlut that you do bears proper fruit, but you need to daven. Okay, so I wish everybody mamash afreya chapurim. And anybody has any questions, feel free to be in touch with me. And we will pick up Mirz Hashem with chapter 6 next year. And if anybody wants to do, some other kind of learning, particularly towards the Haggadah, be in touch with me like immediately, or towards Shavuot or something like that. Please be in touch. Otherwise, I'll let you know what if will be coming forth. Thank you again so much. All right, so I should have stopped the share while I was saying all that. And I'm going to end. I should actually